How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Rietta, and today I am with Nichole Lee. So, Nichole, how do you deal when the shit gets real? Or just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so Rietta, how do I deal when the shit gets real? I have found that sitting and allowing myself to navigate and process the shit is actually the way to go. I find that oftentimes we're taught to maybe try to go over it or under it or around it. And sometimes actually sitting in it and better understanding and gaining sometimes the wisdom from why I'm in the shit is going to actually help me navigate my life in that moment and beyond. So I think that's the first thing that came to me is sometimes sitting in the shit's not bad.
I'm sure there are some people out there going, no, I don't want to do that. So what would you say to those people that are like, please don't make me?
Yes, and I think that leads segue into the work I do as well is yeah, I can understand and I acknowledge how difficult and challenging that can be. And I acknowledge that we're typically taught what I just mentioned to kind of go past it, go around it, go over it. And I would just invite you to maybe just take a moment. You may not be able to sit in it long enough because it's so uncomfortable and so foreign, but I would just invite you to try. And the other part is if it feels so unbearable, the greatest thing that I talk about with the work I do is honoring you. So I can invite you to do something, but you get to reject the invitation, right? So the most important thing is really honoring where you are in the process. But I will say, if you're willing to give it a try, you can always just keep moving on from that point in time. So again, it's very common to feel uncomfortable, right? When we're sitting in the midst of, sometimes they say the midst of the mess. But I personally have found, and just the work I do with clients is in that mess that we find the message and we find the ability to move forward with greater clarity and courage to do so.
I love all that. And clearly you started somewhere before you're doing the work that you did.
Yes.
So where did you start in all of this?
Yes, thank you for asking. So I was in the kind of traditional model of going and getting an education. And then I went straight into corporate America where I worked for 20 years in what's called business management consulting. So basically, I worked with several different organizations, mostly Fortune 500 companies that were going through major change. And they needed people who were experts in navigating change with people and organizations. And that's the work that I did for 20 years. I worked across the globe, which I was super excited that I actually got to engage with people all over the world and helping them with that. And my specialization was mostly in the technology space. So it's even more relevant for folks now because of the AI space and mostly everybody is being impacted by tech. But when I started, a lot of it was more of the kind of some of these corporate functions, but now we're all engaged in tech. I mean, we're right now on a podcast, right? But that's the work I did before I transitioned to work I do now, which I help women who are 40 plus years old that are navigating major life transitions, really begin to rediscover who they are, redefine what their joy, success, freedom looks like, and then help them create that life that really lights them up.
Well, first of all, if you're over 40, you don't look anywhere near 40.
Thank you. I tell people it's genetics and joy. That's my combination. I just turned 48 last month. So yes, I have to give gratitude for my family line, but I do believe the more joyous and happy I become, the younger I look and feel.
That's a good book title right there.
Right, genes and joy. Well, what's interesting about that too is me nerding out a bit in like epigenetics and how we actually can change kind of our gene expression. So you might be onto something. That might be maybe book number 4. I don't think I'll start with that that one.
Well, there you go. Keep it in your pocket, or pull it out later when you're ready.
Yeah.
But something I love that you mentioned in your pre-interview is that you're empathetic. And I think a lot of us are, and it took us a lot of times to figure out that we are. So like, when did you finally discover and understand that you were empathic?
Yeah, and you're so right. Like, I really started to grasp it actually after my mother passed, because I started becoming more curious about who I was as a person. And I think because I had time to research and discover, that I realized that something that might have been considered, quote, air quotes, overly sensitive, or maybe I used to think I was making up things because I could sense and feel how people felt. And so that's really when I really anchored into it. And I found a book, I can't remember her last name, but she is a therapist, Judith, I think it's Olaf, had a book about empaths. And she also has a quiz about, are you an empath? And I took that and it was like, huh, I feel seen. But yeah, that was the past few years that I really started delving into some of these other areas of who I was and how I showed up in the world.
Yeah, it's definitely eye-opening because I'm an empath too. So
Okay.
when you finally like even just meet somebody else that's
Yes.
empathic, you're like, "Oh my God, I'm not crazy."
Yes, and that's the biggest thing, right? I think with a lot of things nowadays is it's that I'm not alone and this is normal, right? Like the whole beauty of us really tapping into the variety and diversity of who we are, and acknowledging and appreciating is part of the liberating piece that I think of just having a connected world helps with, for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely connects us. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we're already feeling other people's feelings. So, I mean, I don't know how much more connected you can get.
This is true.
But you did mention that you unfortunately lost your mom. So,
Mhm.
how did you deal with such a profound loss like losing your mom?
Yeah, it was difficult. My mom was diagnosed with cancer in May of 2018, and she died September of 2018, the same
Oh my
year.
goodness, that's quick.
That was very quick, and I took care of her. So, also just dealing with watching the love of my life, right, my best friend decline was tough in itself. And
Mhm.
so me dealing with what I now know, right? Like I dealt with PTSD, right? I just the traumatic experience of that along with the grief. It took some time. It's actually how I started delving into more of understanding about grief and trauma and healing. And there are several different things that I did. One was seeking the right type of help. So what I found is from me is I found that I really need to work through someone who worked with somatic work. So someone who understood trauma in the body, and me connecting more to the brain and body type healing work. I went dealt deep into meditation work once I started understanding the power of meditation in the healing process. And then I became very intentional about who was in my kind of trusted community as it relates to grief. Because what was so eye opening about it is, unlike I think other situations I've gone through, I just kind of casted a broad net of who could help me, my friends, my family, right? Like, and really with the grief, it became the time that I was like, I need this type of help. And I need people who can hold space for this. But I also at that time needed people who could relate,
Mhm.
and I know that we see that a lot throughout our lives, that relatability, us being two women talking is different than maybe sometimes talking to a man or someone who identifies as a male. That was also really important for me. And that is what really helped me also start to gain an understanding of what was happening and being able to communicate what that grief looked like. It was very liberating. I read a book called The Grief Recovery Handbook, which to me is trailblazing a different way of looking at grief and recognizing
Mm.
we can actually recover from it. We don't have to cope with it. We don't have to carry the pain for the rest of our lives. And that was very liberating for me as well. And there's a lot of different exercises you can go through with that. The key piece that they focus on is the fact that we don't feel complete. There's something incomplete. And so when you
Mhm.
work through figuring out what those things were incomplete and working through getting a sense of completeness within yourself and whomever you lost, you can actually start to recover, right? And start to look at life differently. So those are a few things that come to mind. Definitely getting out in nature, right? Like what I found, if I reflect, is recognizing how much nature and meditation, some of these more what are considered holistic methods, right, were actually where I found the greatest healing and support. And those weren't things that I tapped into as much before my mother passed. I didn't have an
Yeah,
appreciation for nature the way I have now, which is very interesting because I've lived in a lot of beautiful places. But yeah,
it really does make a difference.
yeah,
I definitely feel that way too. There's nothing like getting out and hiking or just sitting by a lake or whatever it may be.
yeah. And not even realizing how healing it is. I think again, going through this process of looking at holistic health that is not as westernized, right, with pharmaceuticals, you don't realize that you have the pharmacy within yourself, but you have things like nature that literally calms your body, or looking at a lake, right, literally helps your nervous system. So that was really eye-opening too, through my journey, of how much we were miseducated or uneducated or uninformed about these other ways of healing ourselves.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be checking out that book. I did have another guest too that talked about what you talked about,
Mm.
which she calls it compound grief, the
Yes.
grief that's leading up to losing your person
Mhm.
when you know it's coming, because whether they have cancer or something else,
Yep.
and you don't even really realize how much that's affecting you.
Yeah. And a part that too is like, so you have anticipatory, like I was anticipating her dying once I knew that, right? Then you have
Mhm.
the compound. And what's interesting about it too, about grief, through the Grief Recovery Institute, I think it's Institute or Method, there are over 40 different types of experiences that are tied to loss. So a
Oh.
lot of times we talk about grief tied to losing a loved one, and it's often a pet as well, or losing a relationship, right? Like my heart is
Mhm.
broken because of a divorce or something like that. When you think about how many losses we've had in our lifetime that we have not been given the opportunity to process, a loss of a job, a move, that loss of connection of community, estranged relationships, right? Like when you start to look at that, you can imagine the level of compounding that's already happening. It
Mhm.
just so happens that sometimes these other type of experiences, particularly based in my situation, so close to my mom, that it really cracked open this it cracked open my view of how much other grief I had actually carried from relationships, from challenges in the workplace. And so that's where it was really helpful, as I began to recover, compound healing, compound recovery as well. So that was just very eye opening. And I appreciate sharing that, because I think sometimes we're also taught that we must carry the pain and suffering for the rest of our lives. And part of what I do in my work is the liberation of, you don't have to, and you get to choose to live in joy while still acknowledging I love my mother, but I don't have to suffer the rest of my life because she's gone. I get to use the meaning and purpose of that. And that's really how I got into the work that I do today, is because of her. I say that my mother's death was my rebirth. She's the reason why I woke up to reevaluate my life, and I do what I do every day. So I'm grateful for that. And I can still miss her at the same time.
Yeah. And I think what some people might even forget is like your mom wouldn't want you to be sad
Right.
or carrying that with you all the time.
Yep.
So
Yep.
why should you be?
Yeah. And that's the part of us balancing between our logic, right? Like how we, what we know and what we feel. And I think
Mhm.
that's the conversations that we have where we're like, wow, that's not the case. And then how do I heal what's happening inside of me that can't connect to the fact that they wouldn't want that? Right. Because you're
Right.
absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you did touch on this a little bit, but how
Mhm.
did you fully make the transition from saying goodbye to the corporate world and going off on your own journey?
Yeah, so it was in the midst of COVID. I was in meditation, and
COVID seemed to be the turning point for a
yeah, it's
lot
a
of
turning
people.
point for a lot of people. And you know what's interesting too, Rieta, is actually 2018 too. I meet a lot of people at the time, like my mom passed, like something was going on in that year too, where businesses were either being restarted or something, some shift. And definitely COVID, to your point, either it brought people closer to things, people, experiences, or it actually like cracked you open that you were like, I got to do something else. Right. And so that was
Yeah.
very much me. I
We
was
need
in,
our
you said what?
astrological girlies to like come on and be like, what happened in 2018 that had everybody shifting?
Well, see, there you go. Cause I'm literally like, I mean, I've met these storylines of businesses that were restarted, or that's when their activation or reflection or awakening occurred. And that's very similar to me, right? It started in 2018, and then COVID, which I think, as we know, just that is literally PTSD for everybody across the globe, right?
Yeah.
Um, we all in the fact that everybody's like, oh, we're just back again, turn the lights on. You're like, no. People were significantly impacted by this.
Yes.
But yeah, I was in a meditation. My mother came to me, and I say it was a divine message to leave it all behind. And within weeks, I called my boss. I said, I can't do this. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And I contracted with my employer at that time for that was like 4 5 months or so. And then 2021, I took the official leap. I did not have a plan. I went against what everybody tells you to do. Like, think
Mhm.
through it, have a plan. But I just knew it was what I was supposed to be doing. And so I took a
Mhm.
few years to literally like heal and try to figure out what I wanted to do. I became certified in a lot of modalities, which is also where a lot of the becoming, eye opening about all the different ways to heal and things of that nature. But that's basically how I left.
Good for you. First of all, that's not easy to do.
Literal leap of faith.
Literally. I mean, I have occasionally some people come on here and they're like, I just did it. And I'm like, where, like, can you tell the rest of us how to be like that?
Yeah. And you know what? The thing I come to realize too, and I think the beauty of like what you're offering in this podcast and others is like it's the alignment. Like we're gonna hear the message differently. We're going to get to a point of our own clarity differently. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned is like that's my story, but it doesn't have to be yours, right? And so some, it may come in a different way. You may need to create that plan. I work with clients quite a bit where we look at your parallel path, right? Like, how do we make sure you're getting some of that purpose aligned work done while you may still be in corporate, and honoring that everybody's in a different place. But it is interesting when I reflect because I can't recall where I like thought through anything. Like to your point, it was like, oh, must do, gotta go. See you later. And I reflect now that's 4 years later, and the time just feels like yesterday in a sense. So
Yeah. Was it scary at all? Did you have a moment where you're like, oh crap, I made the wrong decision?
I had more of the oh crap. I didn't realize how much I was going to grieve that, like how much I was going to grieve my identity and how much I gotten so accustomed to a certain way of working and, routine. I think I balance between grief, depression, and excitement, like, um, because it is huge to leave like an identity of 20 years plus, right, in some world to then now even have the freedom to think about what I was going to do. Like,
Mhm.
especially with the work I did, it was very intense. I was on a lot of calls. I managed a lot of projects. And to then be like, I get to choose whether or not I get out of bed at 5 or 6 a.m. Like, it was so foreign, right? Like, it
Mhm.
was so foreign to be like, what do I do with myself? Right. It's part of the reason why I help clients because I was like, I get it. I didn't even know what to do with myself. Like, it felt so foreign. I had a few times where I reflected back on perhaps potentially going back, but it was very short. Like it was like because my drive was so mission driven, it was like you can't, like you have to keep moving forward. but definitely went through a lot of the emotional roller coaster pieces. And especially with it still being on that tail end of kind of COVID and a lot of still like isolation and needing to do my work virtually, it was tough. I think the isolation and disconnection from people was a big one for me.
Yeah. And you made a good mention too that a lot of us get tied into thinking who we are is our job. And
Yeah.
that's also not the case. It's just something we do. It's not who we are. But
Yeah.
it's hard to separate that, especially like you said, you were in it for 20 years. It's hard to not be like, I'm Nichole, this corporate gal,
Exactly.
when I've been this corporate gal for 20 years.
And so I would say with me being in consulting, your titles and the expertise and all of those things were basically how you were positioned on projects. So it was extracting the corporate, it was extracting the labels, it was extracting needing to be the expert. Like I went through that for the longest. Like it's part of the reason why I really don't use it a lot now. I'm like, I'm your guide, right? Because I was like, having to be the expert was a lot.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that many people can probably relate to is we all have typically some role that we've cling so much to that when that is when we separate from it, that identity piece does become that reflection point. So again, like it could be a relationship, it could, for me it was my job. Sometimes it could be your kids go off to college, whatever that is, retirement. So it is something that I think our society doesn't help. I think we still reinforce a lot around titles and roles. And so when it kind of smacks you right front and center, you're looking at yourself in the mirror without all of them, you're not like, ooh, what do I do now? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I say things at work that I'm like, I never thought I would ever say this. Like, and I'm sure you relate being corporate, saying like,
Mm.
I'll circle back and let's align on this and let's touch
Yeah.
base. And I'm like, who is this person?
Oh my goodness. And what would you say is one of the things with your identity that you shifted out of, that you maybe clung onto?
Oh my goodness. Probably a person with anxiety. I identified
Mm,
as a person with anxiety for a long time. And
right.
that, again, is not my identity. That's just a situation that occurs
Mhm.
or a symptom or however you want to word it, but it's definitely not my identity.
Yeah, that was a really powerful that you brought that up too, because I mean, it makes me even think of the song that's out about my anxiety, right? Like, there's a lot of these, it's literally calling me, right?
Uh-huh.
But perhaps I love that you mentioned that because sometimes people don't necessarily think of those, right? Those
Mhm.
types of labels or even a diagnosis that may help you is depending on how much you anchor in that and how free you feel, right? Once you know that information, right? I even think of my mother and how people look at cancer many times. Once that label was placed on her, she had given up, right? It was unfortunate, but it was like her connection to that was there will be no life. And so
Mhm.
it's been one of the things that I look at more. And again, I appreciate you saying the anxiety or any other diagnosis is there is something going on inside of me that this helps me recognize or name it, right? But it doesn't have to be who I am.
Right. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. It is. I obviously understand, like, for your mom, it was a big part and it was probably a big surprise and
Yeah.
maybe even a little, I don't even want to say maybe, it was probably devastating, but it
Yes, for
certainly
sure.
wasn't who she was. She was, I'm
Yes.
sure you could list a million things about who she was.
Yeah, and there's even science that based on how society has leveraged words, that's why I say even when you mention anxiety, our actual body will shift cellularly based on the connections of that. So if I'm using a label that has had a lot of negativity or stigma or any kind of negative connotation, it literally can shift your physiology.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Dispenza talks about that. I don't
Yes,
know if
I
you've
love
ever read.
Dr. Joe. Yep.
Yeah, Dr. Joe talks about that he literally healed himself from a back injury from changing his point of view. So, and I'm
Yep.
sure there's people out there listening going, "Y'all are crazy," but there's science that backs
There is
it.
science there that backs it. It's and Dr. Joe was actually where I started in my meditation journey of again connecting kind of what some people call the woo to the science. And he's one of the people I
Mhm.
greatly appreciate because I went to his 1 week retreat
I've
and
wanted to go to one. Was
oh
it
my
amazing?
It is so amazing because he literally bridges, right? You get all of the science and all the data with the experience. And so he was a person that inspired me of how they can live together, how you can integrate them. So I love Dr. Joe. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the part. Do your research. The data is out there. It's not necessarily always in your face, so that's where you have to seek it out. But
Hmm.
there is definitely more data around the power of mindfulness, or I'm certified in heart math, so even the power of your heart in the shift in your body and your thoughts and stuff. So
Yeah. I think that's why Dr. Joe is so influential, because for the people that need the science, he gives you the science. And the
yes.
people that like the woo, he gives you the woo. Like,
Yep.
he gives you the best of both worlds.
Yes, you would love it. You have to go.
Yeah. Actually, my very good friend who has cancer, that's like
Mm.
on our, I guess you'd say bucket list. Like, when she's better, we're going to go and do one of his retreats.
Yay, so I'm sending love to your friend, and it's gonna happen. It's gonna be amazing.
It is. It's going to be amazing for sure. And I'd love to hear more about your soul searching journey. I know you touched on
Yeah.
it obviously a little bit, but I'd love to hear more about it, and maybe any like important lesson you want to share, or tips, or whatever you think is important that's you think might help somebody.
Yeah. There was so much to it. I would say one of the biggest lessons that I continue to connect into my life is curiosity. I always go back to, when we were children, we were curious. We asked questions of why because we were curious. We weren't asking it for judgment. We were asking it for curiosity. Why does that go this way? Why is it blue? Why is it red? Right? Like, it's all these things. And it was expanding the view, right, of how we saw ourselves and saw the world. And one of the things that I realized from having the time to sit still and reflect is how much we are conditioned to judge ourselves, how much we're conditioned to ask the why to diagnose something or
Hmm.
criticize something, or right. And so when I shifted into curiosity of literally asking why, from I wonder why I do that,
Hmm.
I actually started getting answers, right? I wonder why um I I operate this way. And then because of that, I then started researching and then started connecting with people. And then again, it just started creating this beautiful way of looking at myself in my life. And that actually felt more empowering, because then from that, I started getting the answers not only internally, but as I started to research, as I started to connect with other people across different landscapes of holistic health and wellness, it started connecting the dots of why
Hmm.
I did operate a certain way and empowering me of how I could change it. And so I think that's something I stay rooted in not only just, having the compassion and love, but constantly being curious and asking from that lens, so that open my brain and body to give me the answer, give me the wisdom that it really wants to give me, and not feeling guilt or shame or some of the things that actually inhibit us from actually working through and getting those answers. So that's one. I say another one that I briefly mentioned as well, particularly with grief, but just in general, being way more intentional about my relationships and learning that those relationships, just like seasons, can change,
Hmm.
and giving myself the permission to alter or change those relationships and not feel bad about them. I think, when you go through a lot of change in your life and you are rediscovering, when you rediscover, you also will discover that perhaps some of the relationships that you have no longer, or the way that you've had them, don't serve you. They don't align to the person you are becoming. And so, me sitting with that and really starting to better understand what I need, but also what I could offer, has been such a fruitful exercise that now I have greater discernment on what it is I need and how I can show up and support others, but also where they can support me with the language that allows me to ensure that those relationships are fostered from a right place, or an aligned place rather.
Yeah.
Because that's something, again, I think just naturally what we've been taught about relationships and longevity and all the things, right? Like you and I could connect, and you might, we're like, oh my God, we're going to connect beyond this, to work on something together, or now we're friends or whatever. And that may shift where someone else in my relationships that I already have might shift as a result. And many times we're taught that's a bad thing. You just met
Mhm.
Rietta. Like, you just met her. How can she be here? Right. Like, and
Mhm.
that's what stops us from actually ensuring that we have the right, and I would say aligned, because it's really, right is relative, the aligned relationships. And I think the third thing around the soul searching piece was allowing myself to redefine what spirituality was, my connection to God, the universe, source, whatever I want to call it, was super liberating, because I realized that I was still carrying this heaviness of what the world may have defined that is, what my soul relationship should be. And that was actually blocking me from the gifts that I have to help other people, but also just be comfortable with who I am. So I
Mhm.
would say that was probably the third thing, if I had to offer something to someone else, is that around, what does that connection look like to you, and how do you find it? What resonates with you? And it may be very different than what you were taught, or even what you were used to before your rediscovery or reinvention journey.
Yeah. I'm so glad you talked about the friendship piece, because I can't, or relationship piece, I should say,
Mhm.
because I can't tell you the number of people are like, well, I have to be friends with this person because we've been friends for 20 years. And it's like,
Yes.
that doesn't mean diddly if
Yes.
they're not helping you any.
Yeah. And it's just a reminder, like, a lot of things, and maybe this was the fourth one, a reminder that much of what we're operating in was given to us. And many times it was given to us unconsciously, right? We
Mhm.
don't even that's why the why is so helpful, because what you just mentioned, many times we were taught, the longer you know someone, the longer they should stay in your life, right? Or they're the person that you should talk with because you've known them the longest. Like, all of these scripts, these narratives run, that have you actually going against what you really feel you should do, right?
Yeah.
And then if you don't have someone like you, it says, wait, you don't have to do that. And then the person goes, you know what? I don't. This is why relationships are important, because sometimes, I always say this too, sometimes I need to borrow a little bit of the confidence and confirmation or affirmation. We talk a lot about people self-love, self-love is great. However, some people, if you've never experienced it, trying to have someone try to figure that out, or
Mhm.
being reaffirmed, can be healthy and helpful as well. So I think that's the other part about those relationships, is it sparks you kind of thinking about things differently, and being challenged in a loving way about why you're doing certain things. And the friendship and family piece is a huge one. I mean, I
Yeah.
work with folks where it's like, well, because they're my sister and brother, I allow them. And I'm like, but that doesn't align to your core values. It's not serving you. You wouldn't allow this in this other situation. But
Right.
when you look at the lineage of what they were taught around a belief system, it's like, we have to. That is the belief system. That is what we do. And so, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up as well, because it is a big one, I think, for a lot of folks, and it
Yeah.
can be scary and bring a lot of it can bring grief, because if you really do get to lean into who you truly are, you may find that a lot of people you are connected to aren't your people.
Yeah. I definitely had that experience because, like you said, when you start shifting and connecting with things, and you realize that a lot of people in your circle are only like, let's say, only calling you to complain, you're like,
Yes.
why have I been allowing this for so long? This energy is so gross.
Yeah. And you get to a great point too of like redefining your needs, desires, and wants. I mean, we think about it like a lot of times, like, I want a good friend, or I want a good coworker. What it's like, what does that mean though? Right?
Yeah.
Like, it may mean that someone dumping on me all the time is not the type of relationship I want to have. Now, I can be accountable because I enabled it, but I actually get to redefine that. And so that's not going to continue happening, because that's not serving me, and it's really not serving them in reality, right? Because you're not helping with any kind of solution. I just become your garbage can, and
Right.
I'm done.
Right. You're just giving me all the drama and you're talking to the wrong person instead of the person that you really need to be talking to
Yeah.
about it in order to actually correct it.
Yes, for sure.
Yes. And not to say that we don't ever listen to complaints. It's just constant
Yeah.
complaining.
And I think that's a point to your point, like, and I think that is even in relationships, figuring out who are the people tied to certain things. And yes, we all go through experiences. One thing that I've recognized is, if I'm, especially in friendships and things, it's different with my clients because I'm helping them get to sometimes a solution focused mindset and heart set. However, to your point, if everything is about a negative sparring, or there's nothing good that we're looking to come out of the conversation, then it's just not a place for me anymore, because I don't want to sit in that, to your point, right? Like sometimes you don't even realize, especially being empathic, you think you're helping, but you're getting all that dumped into you. And then you wonder why you're feeling a certain way, or why you're now having these thoughts and things of that nature. So that's another thing of just being mindful of the impact of what that does. I think is something that folks sometimes don't consider. Like maybe sit with the fact of how many calls have you had with that, and how do you feel after? Take inventory.
Yeah. I mean, it's victim mentality, which is very low vibe, and you don't want to be down in that low vibe. I mean, anger is higher than victim mentality.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. And anger can be fueled into something beautiful, right? So yeah. So a lot of people will become angry with the lack of equality and other things going on that have created amazing movements. It's basically how we fuel it, right? Is really important. How we feed it.
how we feed it. Yes, exactly. And I've had a lot of people talk about that if we all just led with love and loved each other, we wouldn't have a lot of the problems that we have.
Yeah.
But it
And
is hard.
I think it goes back to, again, like, once we seek to understand and recognize that some people were never exposed to that, right? We come into the world free and open, and then certain things happen to us that start to alter how we show up in the world. And it's interesting, I can't remember who said it, but there was like, monsters aren't born, they're created.
Mhm.
And it's just something to consider when we talk about love and compassion for those of us who can see certain things differently. I think that's part of the accountability, is I can see that this is not just this person. I can see a lot of things that probably transpired, but at the same time, I can hold you accountable, just like I would expect somebody to hold me accountable. And I think a lot of times we're not taught that either. I can seek to understand, I can have compassion, but I can also hold you accountable for your actions. And that was a huge one for me to recognize, even in my own life.
Yeah. No, that's a great point and a good reminder for a lot of people. And you also mentioned the importance of providing a safe space. So why do you feel that is so important?
Yeah, and one thing that I also think about too is, just with the conversation we had, that I've come to learn is, safety is all about perception of that safety, right? And so part of helping understand what feels safe for someone allows us to create safe spaces aligned to their perception. And that was something I had to learn, because I'd be like, I'm a safe space, right? Like, when your heart's in, you're like, oh, I'm a safe space. But it took me asking, like, what does safety feel like to you? What words feel safe? What environments feel safe? And I think that's so important, because again, when we come into the world, how we're taught about what's safe and unsafe is through those experiences. And if we aren't given an opportunity to reset and connect to what that safety might look like and find evidence of that, it can be very difficult to continue the healing journey. It can be very difficult to keep moving forward in the new life, or the new world, or the new person you are, and not want to revert back, right, to the old ways of being, or the old relationships. And so that's what I found to be so important, is and two, recognizing that it could literally be one moment of feeling seen that could change somebody's life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we complicate so many things, but the simplicity of giving someone the opportunity to share what safety looks like and then demonstrating it, and literally that change literally could change your life forever. And there's so many stories of that, right, online and things of that nature. And so I think that's why that's important as well. When we understand it's not just emotional, it literally is physiological. Um, that is literally how we're gauging the world. And so that creates that imprint that supports somebody in their life journey.
Yeah. And that's also always been my hope for the podcast. Even if this episode reaches one person who needs it to
Yes.
hear it, then it was all worth it.
Yep. So yeah, and I think when we reflect back, like that's we all desire to be seen, loved, heard, valued, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
if there's some way to do that, and like we just talked about too, that becomes a ripple effect, right? So if we're all kind of focusing to seek to understand and perhaps hold space in some way that works for us, and that can show up in so many different ways, what's the ripple effect that we have in someone's life? And so I love what you're doing, and these why these types of things, like you say, are so powerful, because if it touches one person, literally lives generationally are changed.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, what is one final thing you would want to leave my listeners with?
I would say, um if you have not found your person or people for your journey, I would invite you to keep seeking. I find that sometimes we have to try 2, 3, 4 times to find our people. And though that may feel tough, there is definitely light on the other side of that.
That is a beautiful reminder because I think a lot of us, myself included, because my husband's in the military, we move so much. It's really hard not to focus on the people that you left behind or you lost or you don't
Yeah.
talk to anymore or whatever, and focus on who might be coming in versus who went out.
Yeah. And just recognizing that, again, it may take a few times. And I can relate and empathize with how tough that can be to put yourself back out there or send that additional DM or, whatever that is. I just would invite you to continue, because your people are out there, and when they open their arms to you, you'll say it's worth it. Every bit of it will be worth it. And that's just me and my lived experience. And it almost
Mhm.
brings me to tears, but it was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that beautiful note, thank you so, so much for being here, Nichole.
Thank you so much for having me and all of who you are and what you do. I'm so appreciative.
Yeah. You're going to make me cry now.
You brought it out of me, because it's like, because we all can relate, right? Like we'll just be like, I just give up, and it's like that. And I'm just seeing it so much now, like even our connection, right? Like it's just like, if I just kept, there's my people, I keep finding my
Mhm.
people, but we have to seek it out. That's our job, is we have to keep, searching and seeking. And it becomes easier, because then the ripple effect, you just keep finding your people.
Yep. And you can ask the universe.
Yep.
That's what I started doing.
Mm.
I'd say, Daddy Universe, send me my people. And he'd be like, all right, hold on.
Well, what's funny? I also realized I'd be asking for it, and it was like, well, I need you to open your eyes and see them.
That's a good reminder, too.
That's
We
another
do.
one too. We probably should have added that, because it's like, how they'd be like, show me a sign. That little car thing that's doing all this. Like, show me a sign. It's like right in front of you, like a thing. So that was another thing. It was like, oh, it's right here. So I had to open my eyes more, to be like, oh, thank you. You're showing me. I just wasn't paying attention.
I wasn't paying attention. Yeah, we do. We get very easily distracted.
Mhm.
I blame cell phones and social media and all that. Granted, it has its wonderful things, but it definitely has us very distracted.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Alrighty, y'all. This is how to deal when the shit gets real, guys, and I will see you all next episode.